Francesca and I affirm resolve the United States should end arms sales with Saudi Arabia. Our first contention is resolving the Yemeni war. According to the BBC in 2018, the civil war in Yemen is a proxy war. The Saudi Arabian military supports the Yemeni government and is backed by the US, while Iran backs the Shiite Houthi rebels. Campbell's 18 finds, the war has made 22 million Yemenis dependent on humanitarian assistance and 8 million on the brink of famine, driven by aggressive Saudi intervention against the Houthis. Fortunately, ending US arms sales creates peace by de-escalating the proxy war. Feynman 18 explains that US arms sales to Saudi Arabia created the proxy war. Iran increased military aid to the Houthis to beat back US intervention and made the Houthis reliant on Iranian support. Feynman concludes, the best way to create peace is to de-escalate the proxy war by pulling the United States out of the region. Bawzi 18 empirically confirms that the Houthis only began receiving significant military support from Iran after Saudi intervention. Importantly, Mali 18 notes that US-backed intervention single-handedly cemented the Houthi-Iranian alliance and handed Iran a low-cost means to poke Saudi Arabia in a region of no strategic interest. He continues that Iranian dependence and radicalization has strengthened Houthi hardliners seeking violence while undermining Houthi moderates seeking peace. Fortunately, Leaf 19 reports the relationship is subject to reversal and the damage has not been completely dealt. In addition to preventing peace, Houthi radicalization has caused WAM 18 to find a hardlining of the Houthi movement has caused the Houthis to loot 65% of humanitarian aid sent to Yemen. Contention 2 is grounding the Saudi Air Force. Walsh 18 explains that Saudi Arabia's Air Force is entirely made up of US manufactured F-15 warplanes. These planes are used to bomb Houthi rebels in Yemen. The United States sells the jets, carries out repairs, upgrades technology, trains Saudi pilots, and provides intelligence support. Brookings 18 furthers, if the United States stopped selling spare parts alone, the Saudi Air Force would be grounded in days. Worker 18 confirms, because Saudi Arabia is locked into buying US weapons and other nations' weapon systems are not compatible, it would take decades and cost hundreds of billions for Saudi Arabia to wean itself from US equipment, training, and support. There are two impacts to grounding the Saudi Air Force. The first is preventing civilian casualties. The Week newspaper in 2018 notes that Saudi Arabia's airstrikes have deliberately targeted Yemeni civilians. In fact, Keith 18 finds that 3/4 of civilian deaths in Yemen are due to Saudi airstrikes. Cockburn 18 finds that 80,000 Yemeni civilians have died as a direct result. Second is preserving the ceasefire. Duche 18 explains a breakthrough deal was agreed to between the Hadi government and the Houthi rebels, including a ceasefire in the port city of Hodeidah, a lifeline for humanitarian aid feeding 2/3 of Yemen's population. Spencer reports last week, the ceasefire is on the verge of collapse as Saudi jets resumed bombing. Ali 18 continues that the Houthi leader vowed to initiate long-term peace if Saudi airstrikes stop. Grounding Saudi Arabia's Air Force by stopping the sale of parts would prevent these attacks and preserve the ceasefire. This is crucial for two reasons. First is protecting the flow of humanitarian aid. Wintour 18 explains the ceasefire opens the port, allowing for aid to enter the country, which is crucial. As Stingray 18 adds that Saudi Arabia's prior blockade of the port deprives 18 million people of food. Second is preventing the bombing of Hodeidah. McKern 18 explains that Saudi Arabia halted their assault on Hodeidah to pursue the ceasefire. However, they have vowed to resume their offensive if the ceasefire ends. BBC 18 explains that this offensive would kill up to 250,000 civilians. In the IRIN furthers last week, an assault on the city would permanently damage the port, halting the flow of 80% of Yemen's food and humanitarian assistance. Affirm.
Can I see Spence?
Yeah.
Let me just grab my phone.
Do you want to see the full article or just
Just the cut card with the ceasefire. Yeah. Oh, could I see a little more context? Thanks. Thank you. Starting?
What's the date on this?
What's the date on it?
Something 273.
Yeah.
the very first?
Cool. Do you want to look at more?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Alan, you good? Cool. 7-9 negate, and contention 1 is oil. Elliot 18 of the University College London explains that Saudi Arabia is the largest arms importer and the largest oil exporter in the world. The US heavily relies on Saudi Arabia's oil to fill the shortfall created on Iran's oil sector. Despite increasing US oil production, Saudi Arabia still represents its second largest source of crude oil imports. Thus, Saudi Arabia has power over oil, as our peer 18 of Forbes explains that no other entity in the world has as much power to move the oil markets. Saudi Arabia could quickly bring the global economy to its knees, but fortunately, the US has power over arms. Way 18 of Penn State University explains that statistically, American arms manufacturers make up more than half of all weapons imports to Saudi Arabia. Therefore, if the US were to go back on their end of this bargain, Saudi Arabia would likely retaliate. This has happened empirically, as proposed US sanctions on arms sales caused Saudi Arabia to threaten raising oil prices. Davies 18 of The Guardian explains that if the sanctions had gone through, Saudi Arabia would have retaliated by driving prices up from around $80 a barrel to more than $400, more than double the all-time high reached in 2008. Rapier furthers that during the 1973 oil embargo, oil prices quadrupled. The impact is a global poverty crisis. Rapier furthers that oil prices that high would quickly push the global economy into a recession as it did in 1973 because the vast majority of the world's machinery depends on oil to function. Indeed, Hannah 12 confirms that every recession since World War II has been preceded by an oil price shock, with the majority of them originating in the Middle East. A recent study conducted by the IMF finds that a severe recession would cause 900 million people around the world to fall into poverty, with a disproportionate burden on those in developing countries. Stewart, too, writes that in countries facing economic decline or stagnation, high levels of poverty are a root cause of conflict. Contention, too, is emboldening Iran. Haaretz 19 writes that Yemen's civil war is widely seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran that is being fought on multiple levels and dragging in regional actors. Neither side has gained much ground, as the Iranian-backed Houthis control most urban centers, while the Saudi-led and US-supported Hadi government controls southern ports and coastal towns. However, there exists very little incentive to keep fighting, as Gil 19 writes that the war in Yemen has been in stalemate for years, with no ground being made on either side. Because of this, regional actors are being driven to the negotiating table, and Buzansky 18 finds that because all involved actors are incentivized to end the war, it seems probable that a political agreement can be reached. Buzansky furthers that U.S. diplomatic power and military influence in the region should be able to help settle the conflict on favorable terms, and Haqqani 18 confirms that the conflict will likely continue unless the U.S. actively uses its soft power to bring Iran and the Houthis to the negotiating table. This progress towards peace ends when the U.S. ends arms sales to Saudi Arabia and withdraws its military presence from Yemen. This is because, as Carfano 18 writes, if the U.S. were to withdraw military from the Yemeni conflict and yield control of Yemen to the Houthi rebels, the Iranian government would feel as though it won the conflict. Indeed, Munoz 19 confirms that withdrawing military support from Saudi Arabia by banning U.S. weapon sales would only embolden Iran to push into Yemen and continue the war. This is empirically proven, as Choksi 19 finds that historically, withdrawing U.S. military influence from the Middle East has only catalyzed Iranian expansionism in the region. The impact is intensifying conflict. Avni 18 concludes that handing Iran a victory now will lead to an even worse regional catastrophe than the one in Yemen. Unfortunately, the International Crisis Group 19 confirms that there are 9 potential places where conflict between the US and Iran could ensue. Withdrawing arms from Saudi Arabia by affirming the resolution would be just enough to send Iran over the edge, putting thousands of lives at risk in the process. Negate. Are we good timing? Or
Yeah.
Actually, I can time because I have more charge on my phone.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, starting off on this idea of like the current ceasefire, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So, has that ceasefire been broken?
I would say that even if it has been broken, the fact that the Porta Fideta was opened means that it's working in the status quo.
But if United States soft power is happening in the status quo and the ceasefire is being broken, then how effective is the ceasefire with the United States being there?
I'd say it's pretty effective.
Okay.
But may I take a question?
Sure.
Sure. So who was responsible for getting the actors to the table in the ceasefire in the first place?
Who was responsible?
Yeah.
I mean, like the United States was like partially responsible.
Sure.
We also have cards saying that like the UAE's ground troops are like partially responsible.
But it was the United States who like helped to instigate that ceasefire, right?
I mean, I would say there were multiple actors that instigated the ceasefire.
Okay, you can take a question.
Okay, sure. So on this idea of oil, right? So you say that like increasing oil prices is gonna like hurt the global economy,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so if Saudi Arabia knows this and they're part of the global economy, why would they literally do something so self-destructive?
I would say that because they did it in 1973 and because they saw the horrible ramifications that it had on their economy and they're still threatening to do it, I say that that gives them like some motivation.
Okay, but do threats mean they're actually going to act on those threats?
I mean, I would say yeah. In this instance, it seems pretty probable.
Is it really worth it for them to destroy their own domestic economy just to have like some backlash against the United States?
I would say that Saudi Arabia sees the big incentive to keep the United States in the region. If the United States went against them and pulled out, they have an incentive to raise oil prices.
But don't other actors like give them arms?
Not significantly, no.
Like what do you mean? Like don't they have like arms in the status quo like from other
Well,
nations?
yeah, they have arms in the status quo from other nations, but
And
like
that's like not enough, you're saying?
I don't really know where you're going with this.
Well, like you're saying if the United States pulls out...
I'm just saying that right now, what Saudi Arabia is doing is they're using oil as a bargaining chip.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about what's the terminalized impact off of your first contention?
We say that like the Houthis right now are like losing 65% of aid.
Sure, so how much is that?
What do you mean?
Like 61% of aid.
65
is that?
Percent of aid, like I mean no, like that's like terminalization of aid.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean we would tell you that like 18 million people like rely on that aid, so like
That's fine.
I guess that.
Okay, you can take a question.
Sure. Okay. So on your contention too about emboldening Iran.
Uh-huh.
So you say that like the United States leaving is going to increase aggression from the Houthis, right?
From Iran specifically.
Sure. Okay. If the reason why they came into the region in the first place is like because of the United States, like why would the United States leaving increase aggression?
I would say that there are a couple of reasons. One, because even though Iran came in to counter Saudi Arabia, they found an incentive to be in there once they got into the war. Like their incentive for joining like 4 years ago is different from their incentive to keep fighting now.
So what's
but I would
their
say that the
incentive-
second reason is more
But
important.
what's their incentive now?
Their incentive now is, okay, A, to destabilize like any action against the US, B, to get a border with
Wait, so if
Saudi
the United
Arabia, they
States
get control of
If
Yemen.
the United States left,
No, I would say that if anything, if the United States left, that would be instability and they would exploit that as they have in the past. Are you guys gonna take crap?
Yeah.
Wait, really quick, can I see the card that says all F-15s are from the US? Thanks.
Is there no open rooms on this campus? Every room is so there's no place for work.
we have like other cards. This is like is this the one you cite? It's like the one that says like the United States. We also do one that be grounded in days if you want that.
I just want to see the one. Can you just point out the sentence where it says all F-15s are US? Just that whatever way one sentence says that.
Yeah, well the first one.
First
Okay,
one.
cool, thanks.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Cool. Alright, then we're
Also,
good.
we read Brookings.
Yeah, we have like other cards that say like they'll be grounded in the United
It's
States.
United
No, I don't need to see this. It's all
Cool.
good.
That's fine.
Thanks.
Yeah, hold on, we're going on.
Okay, we sent off. How much fun is that? 10 seconds.
I had you guys at like 15.
That's fine. But yeah, it's like 5 seconds. So on that. That's your water. Okay. Is everyone ready? Cool.
time begins now. Go into their first intention. They talk about oil. Couple responses here. There's literally no probability. Carnal 18 continues that the Saudi Arabia energy minister said there's no intention of raising prices or ever cutting them off because they don't want to risk the whole relationship with the United States literally being deteriorated. It makes literally no sense. This is literally the energy minister. But then second of all, the Washington Post 18 explains that due to the shale revolution, the United States is essentially oil independent, exporting 7 times the Saudi imports, which are only 9% of oil imports. If anything, you can turn the argument against them because driving up prices would send buyers to United States shale, which is a lot better because A, it creates jobs, but then B, we're not reliant on a humanitarian abuse country. But then thirdly, Colgan 18 explains that after the 1973 embargo, which they cite in their own case, the United States created the strategic petroleum reserve that redistributes oil in an event of a Saudi embargo, concluding there won't be a substantial global economic harms even if it were to happen. But then fourth, there's literally no reason why they do it because White 18 explains that Saudi Arabia has no intention of raising prices because it would shave 1/3 off of their global GDP growth, destroying their hopes of economic diversification, which they're trying to do right now. There's literally no probability of this argument ever happening. But then fifth, we would say that they would never ever want to cut it off completely because the United States is always going to still have relationships with them. It would literally deteriorate it and deteriorate their own global economy, which they cite in their case. It literally makes no sense. Go down to their second contention. They talk about emboldening Iran. Couple responses here. First, they say that the Trump's pressure is the reason why we came to the ceasefire. What they fail to respond to is that the ceasefire right now is literally doing nothing. What we explained to you from Spencer from Case is that the ceasefire is literally on the verge of collapse right now due to Saudi airstrikes. In order to get long-term solvency, the only side is our team because we take away airstrikes. But then second of all, we would say that if the United States pulled out of the region, that means Iran is less emboldened. What we explained to you is the reason why Iran became bold in the region in the first place is because the United States involvement. That's literally our first contention. When we say we take them out, it literally helps them more. But then third, you can turn the argument against them because Stratford 18 explains that the Houthis are only able to maintain their legitimacy, support, and recruitment by saying that they're defending Yemen from aggressive Saudi Arabia intervention. If we ground the Saudi Air Force, then we undermine Houthi support. But then fourth, we would say that airstrikes are ineffective at deterring Houthi expansion because they're targeted attacks and cannot control large swaths of land. Which is why Muscatha 18 literally finds that the Houthis were able to seize the Red Port Sea and at dawn despite coalition airstrikes. But we would say that we don't take away any sort of other type things, which are two reasons. The first one is that the Associated Press in 18 it reports that it was the UAE who launched the ground troop invasion that forced the Houthis to negotiate and actually come to the ceasefire. At the end of the day, we're the only side that's taking away the airstrikes. We don't do anything in terms of the UAE. We would say the UAE is the only empirical example of when the Houthis were actually able to cooperate. But then secondly, what we would say is that Saudi Arabia can buy arms from the UK and France. They already get 50% of them there. They can continue fighting them there. Now it's in some weighing. We would say the first way they're going to outweigh their whole entire case is on urgency. We can't wait for Saudi Arabia to win the war if literally people right now are dying as a direct result of not being able to get food. You need to focus on these people right now because they're literally dying in the status quo compared to how many years we don't know in Saudi Arabia. But then second is on probability. We don't know if the Houthis are ever going to win the war or take more land. What we do know is directly airstrikes are the reason why 80,000 civilians are dying right now. When you take them away, when you stop the flow of airstrikes to them, it actually completely takes away. That's 100% probability there. But then third is on reversibility. What we would say is their plan is to bomb the Houthis completely. That means bombing the port city Hudaydah. We would say even if they do win the war at the end of the day, and even if Saudi Arabia is victorious, we would say it doesn't even matter. It's actually really bad because that means even if the war ends, it means the port city can never be reopened. That means that 80% of all humanitarian aid is never going to go through. But then fourth is on scope. They don't actually quantify how many people they affect because of some land grabs from the Houthis. We would say directly, if you take away the ceasefire, which is happening right now as a direct result of the Saudi bombing airstrikes, it literally kills 250,000 people and puts 18 million people into poverty where they literally can't get any access to food. At the end of the day, you're never voting for them because they still have alternate ways to beat back the Houthis, but the airstrikes go away, which is a unique thing.
Cool. Everyone ready? Alan? Cool. Conpro. First on oil, we concede Karen over that there's no probability of Saudi Arabia increasing the oil prices. Don't grant them any offense on their terms. Now on to Iran. First, they give evidence from Spencer saying that the ceasefire is on the verge of collapse. But if we can confirm that the ceasefire is working really well right now, they don't get access to this defense. But second, they say that Iran is there to counter the United States in the beginning, so that means Iran won't be there anymore if the US pulls out. That's just not true. What Munoz finds specifically is that once the United States pulls out, Iran sees that as a symbolic win for them in the region, and that is why ICG finds that they would be very, very likely to expand conflict to other crisis points within the Middle East or anywhere in the world because they see that as a strategic blunder by the United States and that they have an advantage. But then, they say that they take away the airstrikes. But once again, if we prove that airstrikes are the same in their world, and we would say they even get worse, then we're winning this argument. Then they say that outweigh on urgency, but that's not true because status quo is solving right now. I'll get to that on their case. But second, they say that outweigh on probability. No, that's not true. The probability of airstrikes is the same in their world because the UK pivots really clean. Now let's get on to their case and explain why that's true. First on Yemen, they say the Houthis only get significant support after the US came in, but there's two reasons as to why Iran would still be supporting the Houthis in their world. First is that, according to Byman in 2018, even if Saudi Arabia pulls out, the UAE would still be doing the majority of the fighting against the Houthis, which means Iran would still have to be funding them. But second and more importantly, Byman also finds that the Saudi Houthis' relationship with Iran would still be really, really strong because Iran has an incentive to gain a border on Saudi Arabia. That is why they would continue to fight the conflict, even if the United States pulls out. That is the strategic advantage of keeping in the region, which completely delinks their argument. But then, we would say that instead of getting de-escalated, pull out just links into emboldening Iran. That's our second war. So if we win our second contention, we are completely taking out the argument of de-escalation. But we would even say that their own second contention serves as a link into their first one. Let me get to that when I get there. Now on to their second contention, where they're talking about grounding the Air Force. There's a couple issues here. First, they say that all F-15s are from the United States. No, that's not what their evidence says. Their evidence is just an anecdote, a sentence about saying when you see an F-15, it's probably from the U.S. That's not what it means. Actually, 1/4 of all the F-15s, 1/4 of all the F-15s in Saudi Arabia are actually coming from the U.S. The rest are coming from the U.K. That is why they're getting so much airstrike support from the United Kingdom. But more specifically, there are two reasons as to why Saudi Arabia would still be able to fight the conflict in their world. The first comes from Knights in 2018, who finds that Saudi Arabia has such large stockpiles of U.S. weapons that they would be able to continue specifically bombing through airstrikes for a couple more years, even the conflict could endure. That doesn't mean that they could necessarily not attack once they don't have U.S. support. They would still be able to do so. But second, Vescatio 18 finds that UK pivot would be really, really easy. United Kingdom already gives Saudi Arabia 26% of their arms, and they would have a financial incentive to increase the amount of arms that they're giving to Saudi Arabia because they can make more money off of it. That means they completely delinks their argument about not being able to fight, because we would say a UK pivot is much worse because the United States has a lot more regulations as to how Saudi Arabia has to be using their weapons and avoid civilian casualties. That's why civilian casualties have been steadily decreasing in the status quo. But most importantly, the Daily Mail finds in 2018 that right now Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom have been engaged in a secret arms deal, giving intelligence information about how to fly the planes and how to fuel the planes for the past 4 years. That delinks their argument on actual specificity because since they have the secret agreement, they're able to get arms from the United Kingdom very, very easily. Now, onto their argument about saying that other nations are not compatible. This is what they're going to collapse on in their argument. They're going to say that we can't switch our weapon system, but we would contend the United Kingdom has a very strong financial incentive to switch the weapon system and make it really easy for Saudi Arabia to transition because of the money they can make off of it. Now onto their impacts. First, on prevent civilian casualties. We would say if we're winning the linkage of the war, we're winning the linkage to this impact. The second and more important one, though, is preserving the ceasefire. They read this evidence again and again from Spencer, which says that the ceasefire is on the verge of collapse. But we would say that is not true. You have to analyze the evidence based on the date it comes from. Their evidence is from February 1st, but evidence from VOX from literally 4 hours ago finds that right now UN negotiators just announced that both sides have officially agreed to stop fighting in the port of Hodeidah. That means not only is the ceasefire working right now, but we are more specific on impacts. Because if the port of Hodeidah is open to trade right now, that also takes out their argument about preventing the flow of aid, because that is literally where all of the aid in Yemen is coming from. This once again shows that the status quo is solving for all the problems that they talk about. But then, they say preventing a bombing of Hodeidah. But if both sides are agreeing to not bring weapons into the port of Hodeidah, there will be no bombing on the port of Hodeidah. This has a huge implication because it turns their contention 1. The only linkage to their contention 1 is saying that de-escalation would be the key to reducing the conflict. But we would say de-escalation is occurring in the status quo right now because both sides are agreeing to the ceasefire. The other thing that VOA concludes, which is really, really critical, is that the ceasefire has generally held despite having skirmishes. Even if there are violations, if the ceasefire has generally held, it creates conditions necessary for peace talks that become impossible once the United States pulls out.
Can we see the card? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pull that up.
We'll see if they're in cross. Yeah, can we see turn cross?
We prefer if you turn prep for it. You want this one? Where's it? That one that you were.
Can you just see it during cross? Alright. I mean, like, we were just
So it's that one and then it's that one. But I think this is the one that he was talking about. Like,
the 4 hours ago.
Oh yeah, this is from 4 hours ago.
Can I see the article, please?
Oh yeah.
I have 4.
You have it pulled up?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Can I see the article during cross?
I can be here like halfway through cross. So
Sorry.
actually, it's not really good. Yeah, sure.
Or actually, Franny, do you have more battery on your phone?
My phone?
Or is it?
My back.
Oh,
It's 32.
just use that. I just don't want my phone to die. Okay, it's fine.
You can take the first question. You should put it down.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Okay. So when has the one time been when Houthi rebels have actually surrendered?
I'm assuming you're going to tell me in a couple seconds.
Yeah, the UAE came in with ground troops. Does that change?
Yeah, because right now it's not about surrendering; it's about creating conditions necessary for diplomacy.
No,
What
exactly.
the DOA finds
But you say
that
that
we
they
have
didn't-
those conditions right now.
No. I'm talking about your contention, right?
I'm
you say
talking
that
about different
Houthis-
evidence.
I'm not
Like, if
talking.
we-
What's my question?
Okay, go ahead.
When the Houthis get emboldened, you say they take more land, correct?
Not necessarily.
So
I'm
what
not
is
talking about
what is
Houthis
the
being emboldened.
terminalization of your second contention?
That's Iran being emboldened by U.S. pullout, and what they do is they create conflicts such as proxy wars
Okay,
in
so
other
has the
regions.
United States
Wait,
ever been effective in actually like stopping Iran at all?
I would say not that well. No.
Okay, so if they haven't been affected, and like the UAE is effective in stopping Iran from pushing forward.
No, okay, so I get what you're saying. These are two completely different things. UAE was effective in pushing the Houthis back because the Houthis aren't getting the full brunt of what Iran can deal in a conflict. Iran's only donating or contributing a little bit of their money right now to the Houthis. UAE fighting the Houthis and US fighting Iran are on two completely different scales.
Wait, that doesn't make any sense. The
Why not?
way that Iran is fighting the war right now is through the Houthis.
No,
the
the way that
United
the
States
Houthis-
is fighting it right now
This is-
through Saudi Arabia.
This is a misconception. It isn't their wars, but they are proxy wars. Iran isn't using the full brunt of their force
Exactly.
by going through the Houthis.
Wait, so
They're
if we
donating a
beat
little
back
bit of their money
if we
to
beat
fund
back
the
the
Houthis.
Houthis, then how do they ever feel emboldened? How does Iran ever feel like they had a victory in like the region?
Okay, so what Munoz finds specifically is that U.S. arms pullout from Saudi Arabia would embolden Iran specifically because they see that as a blunder on the United States and the U.S. saying, oh, we actually don't have the strategy capability
Iran's
to
not
handle this
stupid
conflict.
though. You literally don't frontline anything I say in rebuttal. I explained to
I
you.
frontlined everything.
No, you didn't. You dropped the UAE is still there and the UK still gives arms.
Because
so
they're
that
not
means at the end of the day, you can literally fight back the Houthis.
No.
That
Okay.
means Iran is never
So
emboldened.
I'll repeat my response to this and then take a question. The difference between the UAE pushing back the Houthis and just being able to push back Iran everywhere is that the UAE doesn't go around fighting global wars. Iran doesn't care about Yemen anymore if US pulls out. They're going to move on to bigger things such as the Strait of Hormuz. That's what ICG finds. Those 9 different conflict points are places where Iran has an incentive to attack US forces or literally the US.
Wait, but they
But let me can I ask you a question though?
Sure,
It's been 2.5
yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the ceasefire, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of collapse are you talking about? Like, is that just a violation of the ceasefire, or has it just not worked at all?
Yeah, we say it's not working. It's going to close the it's like literally going to close the port city of Hudaydah, which like stopped 18 million people from getting food aid.
So your card concluded that 2 weeks ago, and then what happened now?
Well, I mean, I haven't read the card Avalon has, but
Like, regardless of the cards,
okay, yeah.
would you say that it just collapsed?
What do you mean has it just collapsed? We
Did
say it's
you-
on the brink of collapse right now. That's why we say we need to act now in stopping the Saudi airstrikes. We said it hasn't collapsed yet. We say it's on the brink
Gotcha,
of collapse.
understand.
Cool.
I got my computer back.
Yeah. We'll take that. Sure.
Yeah. Because they were like humanitarian people and so humanitarian reasons. Okay. And when you listen to the WWF reports that 2 years of the Saudi Arabian Air Force is comprised of this. Yeah. Okay. It's these two as well.
Can we see the secret deal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have that pulled up?
Can you just highlight like where? Okay, sure. Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Do we have something?
Oh,
One second.
we have 3 seconds
Yeah.
left. I'm gonna start off on the pro case and then the con case, and then weighing. Okay, cool. Is everyone ready?
Where on the pro?
Oh, yeah. Contention 2.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Is everyone ready? Great. Okay. Starting off on our contention 2 about grounding the Saudi Air Force. Remember, Walsh just tells you that these are all United States planes, and Brookings tells you if we stop military support, that means they're literally going to be grounded in days without U.S. parts, equipment, and support. That's really, really critical because that means 1, we're going to stop all 3/4 of all civilian casualties that's happening in Yemen. That saves 80,000 lives, and 2nd, we preserve the ceasefire. Spencer tells you it's on the verge of collapse because of airstrikes. And Ali tells you that the Houthis will come to the negotiation table if and only if airstrikes stop. That comes directly from the Houthi leader. Their main response is that only 1/4 from the United States and the UK will fill in. 2 responses. First, the WPF reports in 2018 that 2/3 of the Saudi Air Force is comprised of US F-15 planes made by Boeing, which means that if 2/3 are leaving, that means they're not going to be able to fly. But second, Novak explained that because Western countries don't want to be the only nation propping up humanitarian abuses, in Yemen, if the United States stopped selling arms, the UK and the rest of the EU would follow suit, which means the UK will literally never fill in. They have no probability of any solvency. The only way to make sure airstrikes never happen is to vote for the affirmative and get rid of arms. But then they just said it's a secret deal, but if the UK pulls out, there's not going to be a secret deal. Also, if planes literally can't fly because Brookings tells you they're going to be grounded in days, there's no probability of this. Then they just say on this idea of the ceasefire, their Vox card says that both sides agreed to stop fighting. Remember, the card literally is talking about they agreed to part of the ceasefire from December. That means the only way to actually make sure that they don't violate it again, like Spencer tells you, they already have is to vote for the affirmative and get rid of all airstrikes. But then, going on to their case, on their contention too about emboldening Iran, remember, the ceasefire is literally not working, but we tell you that the only way to have it happen is to Spencer and to vote for the affirmative. But then second, remember that they just say that the Iran is emboldened because of the United States. If the United States leaves, there's still going to be a power vacuum, I guess. Remember, Seb literally drops her Francesca tells you that literally the UAE is who brought Iran literally to the negotiation table. And also remember that airstrikes are completely ineffective at keeping back the Houthis, who Scotty tells you they literally failed at the Red Port Sea. Remember, we outweigh 1 on urgency. People are dying of airstrikes. The only way to save 3/4 of all civilians is to vote for the affirmative. And second, remember, we outweigh on clarity of impact because we can never tell you when they actually win the war. The only way to effectively save lives is to vote for the affirmative.
All right.
Can I see the evidence about UK won't fill in? Just a second response.
Yeah.
From. Cool.
Yeah, very.
Could you just highlight the?
It's the
It's
bullet
the
bar.
bullet.
Oh,
at the
yeah,
bottom. I
sorry.
can make it bigger if you want.
It's
Can you
okay.
make it a little bigger, actually?
Sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, it's fine.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
How much time do I have left?
We have 2 seconds.
Okay. So the order is going to be pro-con. It'll start on their contention too. All right. Everyone ready? Okay. In their summary, they go really hard for airstrikes. They essentially say that 2/3 of the planes are U.S., but they don't respond to the Knight's evidence from Seb's rebuttal, which says that we have stockpiles. So even if 2/3 of the planes are U.S., A, they still have planes because 1/3 are from the U.K., and B, they still have the bombs, so they're still capable of bombing. That's really critical because the war doesn't go away, and the bombing doesn't go away when you vote for them. But then the second thing is on the U.K. They give you evidence that says that the U.K. probably would have to pull out if the United States does, but A, I would say that the Daily Mail evidence, which goes dropped, says that because they have secret deals, they're still incentivized to go, and B, the Boccaccio evidence says that they have 26% already, they have a financial incentive to fill in. But then, on their second thing on ceasefires, they basically say that the only way to do this is to get rid of airstrikes, but the VOA evidence really postdates this and says that the ceasefire is working in the status quo because the port of data has literally been open in the past week. That means that because of the United States influence in the status quo, the status quo is solving. The status quo is solving for literally all the harms that they talk about. But then, let's go to our case. The round is over when they concede Omni in rebuttal, which says that giving Iran a victory now leads to a worse regional catastrophe than the one in Yemen. This is always put out way on magnitude because even if you grant them that they win Yemen, we still win the round because we have a bigger conflict in the long term. They really concede the Munoz evidence from our case, which says that withdrawing U.S. arms emboldened Iran. This is a symbolic victory for Iran, not for the Houthis. But then, I would say that this makes a lot of sense logically because the United States equals stability. So without the United States, Iran is able to exploit that instability. The ICG evidence finds that there would be 9 potential conflicts that would be able to erupt when this happens because it would seem as a strategic blunder for the U.S. So Iran is able to exploit that instability, expand into different regions, and have perpetual conflict. The way in here is really easy. Even if you grant them Yemen, we still win the round because the Omni evidence goes conceded, which finds that there's going to be a worse regional catastrophe if you affirm the resolution, so that it's always why you're going to be voting for us.
Okay. Can I do this question?
Yeah.
Okay, so what does your Knight's card say?
Which card?
Your
Knights.
card.
Knight's card finds that right now Saudi
No.
Arabia
Can you read it to me because it says Can we go to the constant dribble part?
Did you ever call for this?
No, I haven't.
we read the
We
card.
read it on that.
Then do you just want to read it? Like
We
it'll
were-
save
at
me
the top
time.
of
So
I
what is this?
don't
What is
know.
the constant? Can you read the constant dribble part?
I'm assuming you haven't pulled it up. It'll take me like
I
20
don't have it
seconds.
pulled it up, but I know it is.
Okay.
Okay, I
Then
can.
Let's just wait awkwardly while we look for the card.
No, we can just tell you, right?
Yeah, we can
Like,
tell you,
At
yeah.
the top
Okay,
of,
go
at
ahead.
the top of Knights, it says that the only way they're going to have a stockpile of weapons is if there's a constant dribble of U.S. parts, right? So if we stop selling
Oh,
arms,
okay.
there's no constant dribble. But also, like, we tell
We
you.
would, okay, so
Okay,
to answer
so-
that question, I would contend that the constant dribble of 26% of all their arms coming from the UK,
UK,
is sufficient to meet
that's
this burden.
sufficient. But A, like, you haven't responded to this and you're going into first final.
no.
B,
no.
we would say that the constant dribble is
Okay.
fulfilled by the UK.
No, we have responded because Brookings tells you if the United States stop, these planes are going to be grounded in days. So it doesn't matter if there's a stockpile of weapons.
Okay,
if
yeah,
they're
so
gonna
it
be
says
grounded.
constant dribble of replacements.
Yeah.
They can get those replacements
No,
from different
Because
countries.
you
Yeah.
don't respond to the fact that 2/3 of all the planes right
No,
now
yeah,
are
we
in
do.
the United
We
States.
So
respond to
then where
that.
did the other third come from?
No.
The United Kingdom.
Yeah, but they can't.
So they can just
They
take
can
parts
continue.
off of other
So even
planes. Like,
so, we would say that like A, the United Kingdom fills this constant dribble. B, even if they're not bombing at the same capacity, they're still bombing, so you don't get access to your impact.
and see, this is
No,
an
no,
interview
no, but
cards.
you're-
Can I take a question?
Sure.
So you keep coming back to this idea that the only time Houthis were ever brought to the table was by the UAE. Is the UAE bringing the Houthis to the table the same thing as the UAE bringing all of Iran to the table?
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're convoluting these two ideas.
Wait. Well, what do you mean? Like
So,
we tell
yeah,
you the
so let me-
ceasefire.
let me-
well,
let me
can I answer?
clear. Yeah,
like
yeah.
we tell you the ceasefire happened because of like the UAE ground troops.
So how does that say that that UAE is sufficient enough to stop all of Iran expansion?
Because
that's how you're
they
applying it to
created
it.
a ceasefire. Like
They created a ceasefire of
if there's a ceasefire, that means that neither side is fighting. So
between
that,
one tiny little aspect of the portion of like what Iran uses to fight any
Wait,
conflict.
Iran only uses the Houthis
Yeah.
to fight the war.
They have like their
Wait.
own military.
Yeah, exactly.
They give
Yeah.
military support to the Houthis to
Like
fight.
very little.
What do you mean? First of all, this is new responses. And second,
No, I brought this up in my crossfire too, and nobody contested it because it's true.
It's crossfire that
Wait,
wasn't.
what you mean?
It's fine.
Look,
Which means
regardless,
very
all I'm saying is UAE bringing Houthis to the table and bringing Iran to the table.
Wait, but if there's
is
we're
vastly
talking about the
different
war
scales.
in Yemen, right? If there's a ceasefire
Okay.
and a war in Yemen, and like they brought them to a ceasefire,
Okay.
that's the only thing that matters.
So just to be clear, this response only applies to the war in Yemen.
What else are we talking about? Like,
The 9 other
Yeah,
conflict
9
points that
other
I see.
conflict
Oh.
It's 9 other
Yeah.
conflicts in like what's the probability of Iran and just because the United States pulls out of the region, like there's not gonna be
Really
The
high.
Chauncey evidence that goes conceded from our case gives you the warrant. It says every time the United States has withdrawn military, Iran expands.
to
So if
9
you-
new conflicts?
Well, okay, the
They
ICG
probably
evidence
picked their
finds that
favorites.
there are 9 potential conflicts. If you want me to list them, I can. But
Wait, but
that's
that's
cross.
only if they feel like they won the war. What we explained to you is the United
It's fine.
States.
That's cross anyways.
Okay, that's for us. Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna go our case servers. Is everyone ready? Cool. The time begins now. The only response they extend is this thing about how the UK is going to fill in. The first thing they don't respond to is all the planes are literally made, the WPF planes from the Boeing company. That literally means the United States pulls out, that's going to pull out as well. But then the NOAA part literally finds that, like, if the United States pulls out, it means it's literally going to pull out the United Kingdom as well and every other European nation because they don't want to be seen as the sole perpetrators of a human rights abuse. So they say that they're going to stay in the region because they're making money off of it. That doesn't even make sense. They don't quantify how much money they're making off here. I would say they wouldn't want to lose their international face in the face of a humanitarian crisis compared to some money they're making from airstrikes right now that literally makes no sense at the end of the day. But then what we would expect to do is they cold drop the Brookings card. The Brookings card is going to win us around. With the Brookings card explains that if the United States stops supplying spare parts alone, that means that the Air Force is going to be grounded within days. They don't respond to specific to the United States telling them. What we would explain at the end of the day, even if you buy nothing of the ceasefire, you're still going to be extending the casualties. We cleanly link into this. What we explain to you is Keith explains this causes 3/4 of all civilian deaths. Specifically, COP provides that it causes 80,000 people to die on average. That's specifically, they don't respond to this at all. What we explain is we full solvency for this at the end of the day. But then on the ceasefire thing, they said things like VOX saying that it's working right now. We would say it's not going to work in the long term, considering that Saudi airstrikes keep on doing it. So they also cold drop the elite card who was experiential in their case, who explained the only reason of why the Houthis are ever going to negotiate or Iran to negotiate is because of United States stopping the Saudi airstrikes. The way we're going to outweigh is first order urgency. There's literally people dying right now. We can't wait for Iran to get emboldened or anything other like that. But it's like a little probability. Go into their case. They extend this thing about how like emboldening Iran is going to be really bad. How we're going to say this only with instability. They don't respond to the thing about the UAE is still going to be there and other actors as well. That means that they can push back Iran. They say they're going to push to other conflicts. They don't give the probability of why Iran's ever going to push to these other conflicts. At the end of the day, the most probable scenario is that airstrikes right now is going to stop people from dying. That's the only thing that matters right now because we literally tell you 3/4 of all civilians are dying. That's what we would say. It's like on impact clarity. They don't tell you what this nine of the conflicts is going to do. We would say it's a lot worse. Just focus on the people right now.
Can I see the card? I don't think that's
Okay.
We good?
Yep.
Cool. Pro con. Starting on C2. First in the Air Force, their logic is critically wrong. Their Brookings evidence, which says they can only get spare parts from the US and that all planes are Boeing, are both misconceptions that they try to extrapolate from their own evidence. What their own evidence says is that 2/3 of all of Saudi Arabia's F-15s are coming from the United States. The other 1/3 critically comes from the UK, and it would be really easy for the UK to just fill in for those spare parts because it's literally just sheet metal. You can just take metal off of one F-15, put it on the other F-15, that's no big deal. But ultimately, that leads to the logical warranting for Knights who finds that Saudi Arabia would still be able to bomb with even that diminished capacity of F-15s. They would still be able to use mass atrocities and commit these bombings because they have a stockpile of weapons. They could just use the 1/3 of their F-15s. They're never arguing with the logical warranting as to why Saudi Arabia could still attack even if they have a diminished capacity. But then, they're also conceding Daily Mail when they try to extend this argument about how UK wouldn't fill in because of political ramifications. But that is literally why they're using a secret deal in the status quo. Even if the US pulls out, they will be perfectly fine with that and they can still be ideologically aligned with the United States because they use a secret deal so it's not seen by the international community. Take out airstrikes, it doesn't matter in the round. That also means that we are winning their second under their impact scenario specifically. VOA postdates their evidence. So the status quo is solving for Aden Hadida right now. The only way that they say that status quo is going to collapse in the future is because airstrikes are still going to happen. That is not true. Because airstrikes goes away, that means the port of Hadida is always going to stay open. And even if we didn't win airstrikes, we would still win on their own case. Because the port of Hadida opening gets aid to 13 million Yemenis who are starving right now. That is what their own evidence concludes. That means it will still outweigh the amount of people dying to airstrikes, which is only an isolated amount of people within the ceasefires. Now on to our case. We are winning on magnitude because of the conceded Avni way. What Avni finds is that even if Yemeni war continues right now, letting Iran win now by indicating a personal victory to them from the United States pulling out will lead to a worse regional catastrophe later. Even if they win their case, we still win the round. More importantly, their only response they're sending is that the UAE brought Iran to the table, but that is not the same thing as bringing the Houthis to the table. They only brought the Houthis. Iran is much bigger. UAE cannot bring Iran to the table if Iran is starting a conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, which according to ICG, they are very likely to do. The logical warranting is clear. Munoz finds that right now, you would increase Iranian expansionism when the United States pulls out specifically arms deals with Saudi Arabia. That is why Trotsky concludes historically withdrawing US from the region increases Iranian expansionism, triggering an impact that is much bigger than theirs.